I'm not a dramatic person. Not for me a grand gesture, luxury that attracts the eye and memory. When I graduated from the University of Florida, I was busy taking care of the estate of my father, who died suddenly, so I missed the graduation walk and screamed as students threw our student supplies into the sunlit sky, and my diploma was mailed to me. When I asked Mary, now my wife, to be my bride, I didn't hire a blimp that flew through the sky with signs saying, "Marry me, Mary," or an airplane with a sign reading, "Make me happy, Mary." I didn't get down on one knee in a crowded restaurant and open a box containing a 2-carat diamond while the patrons around us sat and gawked. I didn't order oysters Rockefeller or let her open the one that contained said 2-carat diamond ring. No, I rolled over next to her naked, luscious body on the bed we shared in my off-campus apartment after giving her plenty of pleasure. I ran my hand over her sweaty side. She lay on her back and breathed slowly. From past experience, I thought she would probably fall asleep, and we'd sleep for a few hours and wake one or the other for touching if I couldn't get aroused again so soon. I ran my hand over her right breast. She opened her light brown eyes and looked at me with a mocking smile. "Hugh, are you going to record any new albums? Not that I mind, but you tired me last time." I just looked at her for a moment. I had other women before her. If you have a car, aren't too bad looking, know how to talk to girls, and have some experience, then it's not hard to have sex consistently. However, Mary was different. She was like that from the moment I saw her toned body and beautiful face framed by the long, straight brown hair that every student wore 3 decades ago in economics class in 1970 when we were both high school seniors. She was going steadily one step away from getting engaged to a man from Harvard. He was rich and, with a Harvard degree under his belt, looked ready to provide the kind of life any girl could hope for. But then he was at Harvard, and I was with Mary at the University of Florida. I worked on it for half a year. I was pleasant, non-intrusive, and a gentleman, but she knew I wanted her. Not hearts, flowers, and hugs, but I wanted those high-set 36B breasts and that pert ass that no dress could hide. I would take her out for coffee and study with her, and when the guy forgot to call or was busy, I was there to take her out for pizza, commiserate, and hint that he was probably having sex with some rich northern cutie. We walked around campus for a long time and talked about books, and I convinced her to go to the movies and play with me just as friends. I apologized for stealing our first kiss, and she told me that she would never go out with me again, that class would be our only meeting place. But she did, and I kissed her again and again. I stroked her breasts through her blouse in the car until they quivered, then I slid my hand over her naked body and made her moan. She was guilty because she was still half engaged, but I had no conscience, and I continued to ask her out, fondling and kissing her breasts. We began to get closer gradually, as if learning from each other again. It all started with a simple touch of hands, with a careful look, and over time our feelings began to open up, like a flower in spring. At first she was a little tense and unsure, and I tried to be gentle and careful so as not to scare away her trust. She cried a little for the first time when our relationship became closer, and I perfectly understood her feelings, trying to surround her with care and support. Soon this excitement gave way to openness and trust, and we began to enjoy each other in every way. Our connection grew into something more than just physical attraction. We were together not only in body, but also in soul, and every moment spent together became an important part of our common journey. Each time we understood better what true intimacy means to us. That first night, it was something new for both of us, something that needed acceptance and understanding. Over time, we became more confident in our feelings and learned to listen to each other, respecting boundaries and talking openly about our desires and fears. We spent almost every night before graduation together. These moments allowed us to become even closer. We found our own ways of giving each other pleasure and showing affection when circumstances called for it. Even on days when familiar intimacy was impossible, we found other ways to be together, to feel each other, and to keep our feelings alive. These nights became something special, a time when we not only shared joy, but also opened our souls to each other. We learned to trust and give each other freedom, and this freedom helped us feel real. Graduation was the highlight of our time together, but what we had was so much deeper and more important than any event. This was the story of two people who found each other at the right moment and managed to preserve the special thing that united them. I looked at her lying next to me and remembered those days and nights without even having to think about what I was saying. I love you, Mary. I know I've said this before, but it's true. I want to live with you, have children, wake up with you, and go to bed with you. For the rest of my life, let's get married. She looked at me and my heart sank as she looked at her face seriously and shook her head. No. What? I don't know if I can, Hugh. I thought, I thought you loved me too. Is this all a sham? She reached out her hand to touch my face, and tears streamed down her face. Oh yeah, baby, I love you probably too much. This scares me. If we get married and something happens, like you die, or you meet someone else and fall in love with him, I won't be able to handle it. I would buy a gun or take pills. I love you so much that you scare me. I will never leave you, not willingly. I will never love another woman, and I will do everything I can to get over you. My family is long-lived except my father, and this accident was a fluke. I will make sure my brakes always work. This is how it all began almost 40 years ago. It is now 2006. We have been married for a long time. The parents of a 32-year-old neurosurgeon practicing in Los Angeles and a 29-year-old editor of Random House magazine in New York, and the grandparents of a 3-year-old boy named Austin and a 1-year-old girl named Calabria. Where this devil came from, I will never know. I work out and try to watch my diet. I'm in pretty good shape for a 57-year-old man. I have most of my hair, which is turning fashionably gray, and most of my teeth. I still have a few secretaries and female executives who send signals from time to time with those smiles, light touches on the arm that are not required, and jokes about what they are going to do while their boyfriend or husband is out of town for a business trip. It's flattering, but I never take them seriously. I had one attack, one fever, about 10 years ago, when for some reason I fantasized about having sex with every young woman who came within a dozen feet of me. I flirted and had semi-serious dates, but I could never bring myself to follow through with them to the point of cheating, and one day the fever just went away. Mary became a beautiful and sensual woman. She is 57 years old, but could easily pass for 40. At parties and get-togethers, I got used to young men trying to distance her from me in order to put their mark on her. She takes pleasure in the fact, as she later describes it to me, how these young men, some of them, weren't even born when we first had sex rub against her the evidence of their arousal. It's a sign that adult films have taken over the culture, she says with a laugh as she crawls into bed with me. They really think that all they have to do is rub against me and I'll be overcome with lust. Tell me, Hugh, when you were that age, did you really expect that all you had to do was rub yourself against me to seduce her? You forget that when I was their age, I already had a woman, and I didn't have to rub it against her to make her hot. Just being in the same room made me do it. She poked me in the side. Asshole, it's never been this easy with me. So she was damn hot, and I was pretty good. We had a good life, and I expected that we would smoothly grow into old age together, loving and enjoying our sex life as much as physically possible. I worked at Hunt Bank in Jacksonville, one of the largest independent banks in the Southeast, as a senior executive. I worked for them for over 25 years, back when Old Man Hunt was still around. He turned it into a financial center and raised his beloved granddaughter, Gail, to take over the bank in 1990. Mary worked as a sales representative for McDaniel's Educational Enterprises, one of the nation's largest providers of educational testing materials. She was a senior representative and traveled a lot as a result. It wasn't unusual for her to be on the road 3 weekends a month. Sometimes these were 3 or 4-day trips where she headed north or to the Midwest. There were months when she was away more than at home, but she loved the work, and it took her to places we could never have afforded to go if we had paid for it ourselves. We lived comfortably, but not to the point of basking in luxury. She took lots of photos and always shared stories with me. And as soon as we had the opportunity, we went together to the places she talked about. Honestly, her constant departures made our time together feel like little honeymoons. For a couple approaching 60, we had a fairly rich and regular sex life. We laughed when she told how the men she had lunch or dinner with would sometimes call her at her hotel and ask in hushed voices, "What are you wearing right now?" Sometimes they introduced themselves, sometimes they were just strange calls. She said that at first it unsettled her. Her first reaction was anger, then mild alarm, but no one ever showed up to knock on her door, and if they did, it would be hotel security. And then one night, as we were lying together after a particularly intense and exhausting sex session, she looked at me with something that could be described as embarrassment and said, "Hugh, I've been bad." I laughed and replied, "You definitely were. If you get any worse, I'll need a blood transfusion." She reached out and placed her small hand on my cheek. "No, honey, I was bad on the last trip." "What do you mean?" I tried to understand what she might mean by bad. It could be anything. I was more curious than concerned. "Tell me, and I'll decide if I have to kick your ass or take a tire iron and deal with some guy." "You won't need a tire iron, but you might want to spank me. I would even like it." "Speak. You know that men sometimes call me and ask me what I'm wearing and flirt." "Yes. I'm so damn tired of this. These are middle-aged men who do not dare to pester me when they meet, but for some reason they think that by talking about my appearance, they will turn me on so much that I will invite them to my room for a passionate night. Is that what they call it now? So you want them to be bold enough to propose to you to your face." She punched me in the chest. "You are a scoundrel. The only man I want to see such proposals from is you." But it's annoying, and that evening in Chicago, a superintendent from the city school system, I forget his exact title, called me and asked me that very question. Then he laughed, apologized, and said who he was, adding that I turned him on so much that he couldn't resist. And, well, we started talking. It was so refreshing to talk to a man who just talked to me honestly and didn't try to sound like a pervert over the phone. He's married, but I know she doesn't understand him. He said this, and then he laughed. Said they loved each other, but had been married for almost 20 years since college, and their relationship had become stale. "This is something a lot of people struggle with, honey, at least from what I hear at work. So he asked you to meet." I expected her to say that he proposed, and she refused. Why should this person be any different from the others who tried to get into her bed but never got the chance? No, he didn't offer anything like that. He behaved like a gentleman. A gentleman who calls a married woman to ask what she wears in bed and talks about her bland life. She shook her head, and her face flashed just for a moment what I understood to be irritation. For that brief moment, it felt strange. She was annoyed with me. We were always on the same side. "No, Hugh, I know it was stupid, but he really wasn't acting like a pervert. We just talked and joked, and—" I tried to understand what she wanted to tell me. She acted as if she was joking, but at the same time she was clearly embarrassed, and I did not yet understand what could have embarrassed her so much. And, with all the traveling over the last couple of months, we've been spending less time together than usual. I know. And I got a little excited, even strongly. And during the conversation, I started a too frank topic. Frank, it seems like. Yeah, like phone sex. Have you actually talked to him about how you want to have sex? No, no. We were just talking about how we looked and what we liked. I told him how we make love, and he told me what he and his wife like to do. And you used your fingers. I didn't tell him what I was doing, I swear. But you're pretty loud. He realized that you were doing this, right? She stopped, and I looked deep into her eyes. She looked down, then back up at me. She blushed. Yes, he understood, and said that he knew what I was doing, and that he was doing the same thing and describing how it happened. Did you hang up then? No. Did you help him by telling him what you would do with him? She moved closer to me, took my face in her hands, looking straight into my eyes. No, Hugh, no. If you ever believed me, believe me now. I didn't play this game with him. I didn't say anything while he spoke. But you didn't hang up? No. She lowered her face to my chest. I felt so dirty after that. As soon as he finished, I hung up. I know he tried to call back, but I didn't pick up, and the next day, I avoided him and didn't communicate. Did he try to start a conversation again? Yes. Finally, I pulled him aside and told him that we were acting like schoolchildren and that it wasn't my style. I didn't want to bring the matter to the attention of his superiors, but if he doesn't forget about it, even if it cost us the contract, I will do it. She kissed my right breast. Darling, I'm so sorry. We've been together for over 30 years, and I've never done anything like this. And if we live together another 30 years, I will never do this again. Please tell me you believe me. I thought about it for a minute. Tell me just one thing. Have you thought about meeting him, about taking things further? She was silent for a long time. I really want to lie, but I know you would feel it. Yes, for a moment I thought about it not because I wanted to have sex with him. You have always been more than enough for me, but I have only had 4 men in my entire life, and no one except you for the last 30 years. I never thought about it seriously. I hugged her tightly. Do you still love me? Yes. Have you been faithful to me? Oh, yes. Want to do this again as soon as I can? Oh, God, yes. I was a little shocked by this, I admit. This was the first time something like this had happened on her part, but I remembered my period of strong sexual desire. Only luck, and perhaps someone from above saved me from betraying Mary and from destroying our marriage. It helped that I could read her, just as she could read me. She told me the truth. She gave in to temptation, but retreated. She was. She was human, and I couldn't ask for more. Our life went on. She again traveled on business to Jacksonville, Atlanta, Charlotte, New York, Hartford, San Francisco, Denver, and Portland, but no longer to Chicago. And then 2007 came, and she was sent on a business trip to Indianapolis. 9 months have passed since the conversation about her telephone experience in Chicago. Sometimes I felt like something had changed, but I couldn't pinpoint a specific reason. She was still passionate most of the time, although she seemed cold at times, but we always had those cycles of peaks and valleys. No one can be on top forever, so at times it seemed to me that everything was the same. Then, one Monday, she returned home from a 4-day trip to Indianapolis. I had to be at work. She picked up her Audi TTS coupe, which she usually left in the Jacksonville airport parking lot, and drove to our 2-story home in Mandarin, where we had lived for the past 7 years. She walked through the door with a small suitcase on wheels and stood on the threshold. Hugh, what? What are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? I don't feel well. Something's wrong with my stomach. Spoke to Gail, and she told me to go home and rest the rest of the day. She left her travel bag and walked over to me, and then squatted down next to me. She reached out to touch my forehead with cool fingers. You don't have a fever. Feeling sick? Did you vomit? Did you take anything? No. A little no. Didn't take anything. I don't understand, Hugh. You speak strangely, and you look at me somehow. Strangely. I removed her hand from my cold forehead and squeezed it between mine. I feel like I'm dreaming, Mary. It's like I'm stuck in a nightmare and can't wake up. She looked into my eyes and tried not to see anything. I knew that was exactly what she was doing. We had been married too long for me to not realize it. Say it clearly, Hugh. You're scaring me. Why did you change the hotel from Canterbury to Wyndham West? She looked at me, her lips moved, but there were no words. She peered into my eyes, as if the answer to some cosmic riddle was hidden there. You asked me why I changed my reservation from the hotel where the meeting took place to a hotel in another part of the city. To get to the morning meetings, you would have to get up an hour earlier. No one else from your group stayed there. The hotel said the change did not come from your company. You personally requested this transfer. Wyndham was even more expensive, and you paid the difference out of your own pocket instead of having the company do it. Why? How? How did you even know that, Hugh? I called and checked the information with the hotels. Then I talked to people from your company. All changes are from you. They said you started doing this about 6 months ago, but you're so valuable to the company that no one asks questions. One person from HR said that you always do your job and always make up the difference out of your pocket. This is one of the advantages that key employees have, as they put it. Yes, I changed hotels because I was in Wyndham before. I like it, and it's far enough away from the hustle and bustle of these meetings that I can relax in the evenings. It's worth the small expense. You know I make a lot of money, baby. But I still don't understand why you even decided to find out where I'm staying. Why don't you? And then her eyes widened. It all seemed like a stage play. We said lines, waiting for the climax to which everything was leading. At least that's how I felt. For the first time in almost 40 years, I wasn't sure about her. Hugh, you don't. Don't think that. Where were you those nights when I called your mobile? At 7 in the evening, at 8, at 9, at 10, at 11, at midnight, at 1 in the morning, at 2, at 3. But you never called from numbers you didn't know. One of the computer geniuses at the bank did me a favor and gave me equipment that allows calls to pass through different countries so that they are identified as unknown numbers. You might mistake them for prank calls. But where were you the night before the meeting at 8 in the morning if you didn't pick up the phone after 5 in the evening? Have you ever thought, Hugh, that the phone might have been turned off? That he could have been lying in another room and I didn't hear his call? That I could have a migraine that I've had for 35 years, and that I could put my phone under my pillow so I could fall asleep early so I could get enough sleep before one of those damn meetings at 8 in the morning? Honestly, Mary, I didn't think so. But I can imagine that this is possible. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being out of access, changing hotels, paying the difference out of your own pocket. You make good money and you can afford it. I wouldn't teach you how to run your business, just as I wouldn't expect you to teach me how to run a bank. But what about meetings in Des Moines, Madison, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Kansas City? What about the nights I walked in on you before bed and you said you were already in bed, but you were breathing so hard? Or when I called you in Madison and thought I could have sworn I heard a man laughing in the background and you answered from your cell phone from your room at midnight? She stood up and tears sparkled in her eyes. You mentioned it, and I told you that the TV was on. You heard it. I ran from the bathroom to answer the call because I was afraid that I wouldn't make it in time, and I was afraid that you would start worrying about where I was. I ran because I was scared, knowing that you were already afraid that something would happen since I told you about Chicago. I should have told you, but now I regret it. You said that it didn't bother you, that you could forget, but you didn't forget. It sits in your head, poisoning every glance you give me for 9 months now. Every time you try to call me and can't, you think that I'm with him. When you hear the radio or the show on TV, you think that's him there, that we're making love. The only thing I don't understand, Hugh, is why you haven't hired private detectives to follow me and take pictures. Why didn't you put tiny voice recorders in my bag, my car, or my phone so you had proof that I was sleeping with a stranger behind your back? So you can divorce me, throw me out of your house, and give the kids pictures of me cheating on their dad so they can hate me too. You loved me once. You trusted me. I knew who you were. I don't know anymore. She stood 5 feet away from me, looking at me sitting in the chair. It seemed like she was on another continent. I tried my best to control myself, but I felt tears welling up. When we lie in bed together, when your naked skin touches me, I feel like I can see him. It's like there's a ghost, a presence between us in bed. When you laugh, I can almost hear his voice, and I think it's him you're smiling at or laughing with. In bed, in the dark, when you should be sleeping, you lie with your eyes open, and I know that you are thinking about him. When you're not around, I try to imagine what you do. I see you dating, selling, smiling at everyone, being that very woman who would never touch another man, but I don't see you anymore, like shadows between us. I slowly stood up until I was facing her. Tears rolled down my face. I didn't hire private detectives because how can you hire detectives to spy on your own wife? Behind you, Mary. What kind of world do I live in if I can think about it? Thinking about tapping your phone, spying on your house. This happens in pulp novels, but not in our lives. I keep telling myself that this can't be true. Then, when I ask you, it turns out that it was the TV, or you ran to the phone or the radio. You change hotels so that no one recognizes you or sees you with another man, because you feel more comfortable there. I don't know the truth, but I know, Mary, I know. I know you asked for trips to Madison and Kansas City and other cities in the Midwest because they were close enough that a Chicago executive could get out there to spend a few days with you, and you thought I'll never know. I raised my hands to her, and even that seemed too melodramatic. It wasn't like me. How could you do this, Mary? How could you betray the man who loves you like that? Explain it to me. Help me understand. She looked at me and tears flowed down her cheeks. Now we were both crying. I grabbed her hands and pulled her towards me. I looked at her, remembering how she looked and how she felt so many years ago, when we touched each other, when I was inside her and heard her moan of pleasure so long ago it was. Tell me, Mary, for God's sake, tell me. You can continue to torment me, drive me crazy when I know and don't know at the same time. I can't force you to be honest, but if there's even a drop of love left for me, don't leave me in the dark. Tell the truth. I don't want to hear her, but I need to hear her, and I already hear her, quietly but clearly. Yes, I met him. I was with him from the very moment you suspected, 3 months later. You were right about everything. You were right about everything. When you heard laughter, it was him. I just had such pleasure that I almost threw him off the bed, and he tried to hold back his laughter. When you couldn't reach me, I was with him, all night, 3, 4 times a night. I even missed a couple of morning meetings because I couldn't leave him. I think about him at night when I lie next to you, and I think about him when you are inside me. This is him I think about. I let her go because touching her burned. It hurt even just to look at her now. Why? It's just something I needed to do. I struggled with myself, Hugh, honestly, because I knew that I would lose you and our life, but in the end, I gave up everything for him. Do you love him? This was the last anchor, the last thread connecting me with those crumbs of life that I loved. I, I don't know, Hugh. This was the whole answer. Game over. All, he could say something dramatic, curse her treacherous heart, place a curse on her and her lover. But like I said, I'm not a dramatic person. I'll find myself an apartment, Mary, and get a new phone, a personal one that you can call me on. I'll send you the number. I think you can tell the kids. I looked into her eyes. Find a lawyer. We don't need to fight. We can divide the property. We both make good money. The children are already adults. She was still silent. Goodbye, Mary. Thank you for many good years. I hope he makes you happy. And I walked away from 36 years of my life. The next few days were a blur. I'm not sure I stayed sober for even half an hour. I just had enough time to walk from the hole I was filming to the nearest corner store for a drink. It was on 8th Street in downtown Jacksonville. Pawn shops, video stores, hamburger joints, and prostitutes in short skirts watching out for cars that sometimes stopped. I can't say exactly how I ended up there. I lived in Jacksonville on and off for 30 years and drove through the area often enough to know what 8th Street was like. Guys like me only came here to buy crack, smoke, or pick up girls. The police looked at me with suspicion and even checked my documents a couple of times. I was so drunk that I don't understand why they didn't take me to the sobering up station, but it seemed that the young guys and girls in uniform were simply embarrassed by the prospect of dealing with a crying man who was old enough to be their grandfather. At some point, maybe a week, maybe a couple of days after I checked into the heart of the South Motel, someone slapped me on the face and then started drowning me. I coughed, trying to figure out who would torture a 57-year-old bank manager. Did I somehow manage to cross the path of the Department of Homeland Security? Someone turned my head to the side, and first I coughed, and then began to vomit on the dirty bedspread. It's even scary to imagine what has already dried on its surface. I tried not to think about it. I was suffocating, choking on water, and feeling like I couldn't breathe a drop of air. Somehow I found myself on my feet, supported by two pairs of strong arms. I coughed and wheezed, still trying to breathe in some oxygen. For those few terrible seconds, I was sure that I would never be able to breathe again, and that I would now pass out in this cheap abode of hell. For the first time in a long time, I remembered my son and daughter. Why did I even do all this? Why did you decide to die in this cheap motel room? Then I remembered why, and I wanted to forget again, or get drunk, or just pass out and not worry about anything anymore. But some bastard kept pounding on my back and screaming at me to breathe. I remember vomiting again, and then finally being able to breathe. The next thing I knew, the cool leather of the leather cabin touched my back, and I was wrapped in clean, nice-smelling towels covering my bare thighs, arms, and legs. Damn, I was completely naked. And then I caught a familiar aroma. I managed to open my eyes. Just as I thought, I was sitting in the back seat of Gail Hunt's limousine. She sat opposite, impeccably dressed as always, wearing a green and blue blouse and skirt. The neckline of the blouse revealed her breasts. Her cold blue eyes, so bright that they seemed to glow in the light of a lamp, were riveted on me. Her legs, which would have been the envy of her chest, were crossed, dressed in silk stockings that looked more seductive than any nudity. "Hello, boss. Nice to meet you in hell." Percy Coles sat to my left. For a man named Percy, he was one of the healthiest guys you'll find outside of most NFL locker rooms. Despite his size, he was one of the most gentle and caring people I knew. Percy was vice president of human resources at the Hunt banking chain. On the other side sat Bobby Beaufort, vice president of financial planning for the Hunt banks, the only man I'd ever seen beat Percy in an arm wrestling match on the team weekend that Mr. Hunt had introduced 20 years ago to boost employee morale. Percy was whiter than printing paper and Bobby was blacker than coal. I knew them both for over 20 years and once held Percy's head over a wastebasket in his office when his partner left him, telling him he had found another man. And once he pulled Bobby's black ass out of a biker bar when he found his wife and brother and went into the bar to challenge everyone to a fight. "Hello, guys." I paused, then added, "You shouldn't have pulled me out of there. I'm already dead. All that remains is to make it official." "Shut up, Hugh," Percy said, not without kindness. "And please try not to puke on us again," Bobby added. "Go to sleep, Hugh," Gail said. I suddenly remembered why, in all the 30 years that I had known her, it had never once occurred to me to make love to her. She was a beautiful, buxom blonde with a fortune, conservatively speaking, of 50 million. What was there not to love? Then I remembered that I first saw her when she was still a girl, and I always perceived her that way, and also that her grandfather, Old Man Hunt, was one of the best people I knew. He hired me, and I built my whole life around his bank. When I woke up again, I was lying on clean sheets that did not smell of vomit, did not hear the rustling of cockroaches in the corners of the room, and there was no taste of blood or alcohol in my mouth. I was wearing stiff, clean white pajamas. With the distinct smell and feel of that room, the memory returned, and I wondered how long I could keep myself from going back to hell this time. However, this would not be fair to Peter and Nicole. They had a family, children, and I was one of their parents. I lost my father too early and my mother just a few years later. This was one of the few experiences where life didn't treat me too fairly. How could I make them half orphans just because their mother turned out to be a fucking prostitute? But how could I continue to breathe when it seemed as if one of those prickly balls of burdock that grew in the yards of my childhood was stuck deep in my heart, and every breath caused pain, as if the thorns were tearing my flesh? There must be some trick. If I can breathe long enough, I will find him. The door opened, and a vision in pink and white silk slid into the room and sat down on the bed next to me. When she moved, her ample breasts swayed slightly under her robe. I was trying to figure out how Gail Hunt could be here, given that it was already quite late in the morning judging by the light coming through the large French windows. Why isn't she in the bank? Today is Saturday, Hugh, she said, easily reading my thoughts. Saturday. Mary arrived on Monday, and now it's Saturday. Where did the whole week go? You've been drinking and passing out almost all week, she answered again, guessing my thoughts. Why, Gail? Why all this? I gestured around the room around me. I knew where I was. It was the main house on the Hunt estate, a 20-room Shangri-La that her grandfather began building and nearly completed. I've been to parties here. I was here when she got married. I was here when she announced that she was leaving her husband, a high school teacher, because their marriage was not working out. I watched her face as she beamed at the tall, handsome, sneaky bastard that everyone knew she had been secretly seeing for months before her stupid husband realized what was going on. Back then, I still wondered how someone could be so blind. Now I know. A year later, I was here again when that bastard made a mistake and slapped her in front of his friends. But before I could get to him, Percy broke both of his arms and threw him out the door. And Bobby sent 3 of his friends through the thick glass window, one after another. They say love is blind, but it only took one blow for her second marriage to end, and now she, like me, enjoyed her bachelor life. Of course, she had an advantage over me. You didn't come to work, Hugh. That was enough. We couldn't find you. And when I finally found Mary, she just said that you left home and weren't going to come back. She didn't know where you were. She looked at me, and there was obvious pity in her eyes. She flew to Chicago on Tuesday, the day we found out you started trying to drink yourself to death. We spoke to her on the phone. She didn't say, but we found out she was in Chicago. She wasted no time. She kept her mouth shut so much that I started checking some things. Obviously, you already knew about this. His name is Richard Kelly, 45 years, deputy head of the Department for Purchasing Textbooks and Academic Materials. Makes $110K a year because he has an uncle on the Chicago City Council, and his family has a long history of being involved in politics. He was married, but 6 months ago he separated from his wife, moved into a townhouse, and is often seen with a lady very similar to your Mary. Mary has been staying with him since she arrived there on Tuesday evening. She took a 2-week vacation from McDaniel's. She extended her hand and placed it on mine. I have photographs, videos, and audio recordings. It wasn't difficult. If you need anything for any legal proceeding, just say so and it's yours. I raised my hand to wipe the moisture from my eyes. For what? Because you are a valuable member of the Hunt organization. You are a good person and the closest thing to a real uncle that I have in the world. I loved Mary like an aunt, and I still can't believe what I saw and heard. I looked at the sun's rays refracting through the window. Thank you, Gail, but I won't need any evidence. Are you not going to divorce her? No, she will file for divorce, I think. I don't plan to get married again, and in any case, I have enough money to live comfortably. We have nothing to quarrel about. She will probably submit documents. It looks like she's trying to build a new life with this guy. I won't stand in her way. She looked at me. You've been married for 36 years and you're not going to do anything? Just let her go. She dated him for 6 months and hid it from me. She talked to me and pretended to be a loving wife while he lay naked in bed next to her and was probably inside her. She thought about him when she was with him, and she thought about him when she was with me. It probably didn't start 6 months ago, but from the first time she met him 9 months ago. She hasn't been my wife for almost a year. She told me that she missed meetings because she couldn't tear herself away from his caresses. He's 12 years younger than me, which means he's a tougher lover. She hinted to me that he might do it 3 or 4 times a night. I haven't been able to do this for many years. The truth is that she wants to be with him. As soon as I left her life, she flew to him, and he left his wife, almost certainly for her. Who am I to stand in the way of true love? She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Hugh, I'm so sorry. If there was a couple in the world that I thought would last forever, it would be you two. I squeezed her hand back. If there was ever a time when I wished I were 20 years younger, it's now. I'm not young anymore, Gail, but there was an old TV series called Gunsmoke. It was a great show. In one of the episodes, the hero, a marshal named Matt Dillon, met a shooter who turned out to be faster than him. This has never happened before. Everyone was amazed, but Dillon wasn't surprised. There is no horse that cannot be ridden, and a rider that cannot be thrown out of the saddle. This is the short version of the phrase, never say never. No one in this life is guaranteed anything except death. She just shook her head and stood up. Will you go to work on Monday? I'll give you a little more time if you need it. I'll go back to the office. I think I've already drunk myself to the limit. Work won't wait, and I need to get back to business. She stopped at the door. She stood there for a moment, then turned back to me. You didn't say anything, Hugh, but I know you must think about me, and about Robert and Cameron. No, it was you. And this is me. You don't have to play the part of an uncle, Hugh. I know what you're thinking about this. Robert loved me, and I deceived him for months, had sex with Cameron in meeting rooms, motels, and limousines. Then I abandoned Robert when Cameron and his cronies almost killed him. I left a good man, and the man I chose turned out to be a first-class scumbag. It happens, Gail. I stopped judging people a long time ago. And if you consider me an uncle, then I must confess that I have always seen you as something of a niece. I thought you were making a mistake. I knew Cameron was a brute who would hurt you. Everyone knew it except you, but it was your life. She ran her hand through her blonde mane. In the light of the sun, it shone like a soft helmet. Gail was a beauty. I loved Mary, and there was no woman in the world I would have chosen over her. But I realized that Mary was simply an attractive woman, while Gail was dazzling. But she slept alone, except sometimes with another tall, dark, and handsome lover, whom she regularly led through her bedrooms since she kicked Cameron out. Meanwhile, Robert Sandler, who loved her, disappeared from the face of the earth for the employees of Hunt Bank. No one dared mention his name in her presence. Sometimes I thought she ignored him too much, but like I said, it was her life. The reason I brought this up, even though I made it a rule that no one should mention it in my presence, is this. I know that I am now terribly angry with Mary for what she did. It pains me to see you suffer, and you really do suffer, no matter how hard you try to keep up your face. However, despite my current feelings about Mary's actions, I know what it's like to fall in love, to be obsessed, to be infatuated with someone when you know it's wrong, that you're hurting people you shouldn't be hurting. But you do it anyway. It's like falling off a cliff. Suddenly, you find yourself there, and you no longer understand how you got there, but nothing else matters except this person. I've talked to other people who have gone through this, and I know it happens to men too, but it seems to affect women more because we're always expected to be good. We expect men to be dogs. What are you leading this all to? Have you thought about what will happen if she returns? What if she decides that she was mistaken and says that she just lost her head for a while? When I didn't answer, she asked, "Well, there's nowhere to go back, and she won't come back either." Why are you so sure? You didn't see her face when she talked about him. She won't come back. Work turned out to be a great medicine. I came to work on Monday and walked into my office. If anyone knew what was going on, I didn't notice it was just a normal day, except that that day and the days after, no one asked me how Mary was doing. None of the secretaries with whom she exchanged recipes found on the internet mentioned that they tried to reach her by phone and could not. The following weekend, there was a dinner and dance at the Lodge and Club in Ponte Vedra, an expensive oceanfront hotel south of Jacksonville, where the Hunts had for generations hosted dinners for investors, wealthy clients, and important politicians. It was a business event and a $1 Zizens in the Seat farewell dinner for former Jacksonville State's Attorney Dallas Edwards. He was an old friend of old Hunt's, and their friendship spanned over 20 years, and Gail was friends with the wife of his former deputy, who had played an important role in the so-called court massacre. All major bank employees were required to attend to show that the company respected its partners, so I went too. Once upon a time, Mary would have been next to me on such evenings, But this time, sitting with me at one of the main tables was Coffee Allaport, the mathematical genius who had revolutionized the bank's computer systems and looked better in an evening dress than most women without clothes. I felt like an old womanizer. She looked younger than her 35 years, and she had so much smooth, radiant, mocha-colored skin that I felt I had the decency to at least show signs of interest. But she made little jokes about banking and how secretaries started hitting on me back in the early 20th century, and it made me smile. Not to laugh, but even just to smile was something meaningful for me now. She persuaded me to go out onto the dance floor, and, clinging to me, she moved so that I felt the soft roundness of her breasts pressing against my chest. In the middle of a slow dance, she looked up at me, and a faint smile flashed across her face in which sadness was evident. Hugh, I'm starting to get complex. I literally massage your breasts and nothing. Am I losing my charm? I leaned over and lightly kissed her forehead, as one does with a beloved granddaughter. If you weren't young enough to be my daughter, and if everything had been different, we'd both be blushing with embarrassment. Coffee. But I want to thank you for choosing to spend this evening with me. It was noble of you. She pressed her face to me, and, so quietly that the other dancers could not hear us, said, I know I should keep my mouth shut, but if that damn bitch were here right now, I'd claw her eyes out. The following Monday, around 11 o'clock in the morning, while I was reading the Drudge Report on my computer, pretending to be working, my secretary Lucy informed me of a visitor. When she told me who it was and why he came, I just sat back, trying to catch my breath. It was like a sharp, powerful blow to the ribs that took your breath away. Then I told her to see him out. Matt Henry was about 6 feet tall, with silver hair and sharp, professional eyes. It was clear from his neat suit and manners that he was a lawyer. He handed me a large yellow folder. I didn't open it. He extended his hand to me, and I automatically shook it. Mr. Davidson, my name is Matt Henry. I represent the firm of Martin, Devon, Bailey, and Bartley. Thank you for your time. I just looked at him with open curiosity. Mr. Henry, I admit I am puzzled. Why would you waste your precious working time on something that any courier could do? You do not need a lawyer to serve divorce documents. He pointed to the chair opposite me and asked, Can I sit down and explain why I'm here? Certainly. He sat down and pointed to the yellow folder. I didn't tell your secretary why I'm here or what's in this envelope. Why did you decide that these were divorce documents? You said you represented my wife, Mary. There is nothing to guess here. The only question is what exactly does she want? He sat there for a moment, just looking at me, and I could see that his interest was intrigued by something. I was silent, waiting. Honestly, I'm here because you're Miss Davidson, although she's going back to her maiden name now, Meadows, right? I asked our company to personally deliver these documents and messages to you. Has she already reverted to her maiden name? I'm surprised that she kicked me out the door so quickly, but to also give up her husband's last name. After 36 years? To be honest, Mr. Davidson, it surprised me too. He looked at me with a strange look. What? I'm trying to understand what the husband could have done to cause such feelings in his wife. I don't quite understand what you're getting at. Quite simple, although cruel. Miss Meadows has asked us to let you know that she has already moved from Jacksonville to Chicago, and her company is reassigning her to a new position. She wanted you to know that she took all the things that interested her from your former home. She is not interested in the house, and she is ready to sell you her share for 30% of the appraised value, or you can sell it and send her her share of the proceeds. So carefully and decisively, this doesn't sound like my Mary, and she doesn't want anything else from the house. Did you get everything you wanted in a couple of days? You can't even imagine how neat and decisive everything was. She said you can keep all the photos. She only took a few photos of your children. She asked that any of her personal belongings, including clothes, that you find in the house be either sold or given to Goodwill. She noted that you are probably aware, or should be aware, that she has already withdrawn approximately 40% of your joint savings, and that she is now dividing up all ERAs and other joint financial assets. If you have questions, you can contact us, or, if necessary, your attorney can contact our firm. She would not like you to try to contact her, and if you do, she will refuse to communicate with you. Is that what she said? She personally told me this over the phone on Friday. She asked me to tell you that she doesn't want to see or talk to you anymore, and, if possible, to be in the same city with you. She also said that she requested the simplest type of divorce with the division of financial affairs and the opportunity for both to go down a new path. Again, to avoid having to communicate with you. I just looked at him. Even after everything that had happened, I was stunned. He lowered his voice and ran his tongue over his lips as if they were dry. You can show these documents to your lawyer, but they are quite simple and clear. Miss Meadows is essentially robbing herself by giving up what she could have gotten after such a long marriage and giving your income and assets. I tried to convince her to do as required by law, but she said that the only thing she wanted was freedom, and as soon as possible. He shook his head a little. So I have to ask, what did you do to make your wife so angry? Nothing. She just fell in love with another person. This happens even to those who have been married for 36 years. He looked at me again, clearly thinking that I was hiding something and lying. The lawyers I have met have long since been stripped of their human kindness by the worst aspects of human nature and the subtle cruelty of the judicial system. If I, like him, found myself in a situation where a couple, happily married just a couple of weeks ago, suddenly found themselves at the bottom of Dante's Inferno, I, too, would think that something was wrong here. I knew what he was thinking. In his eyes, I was the scoundrel who cheated on his patient wife and ended up going too far. I nodded at the thick paper envelope. I'll give it to the lawyer and contact you. Henry looked down for a minute, then looked back at me with an almost embarrassed expression on his handsome face. I'm embarrassed to say this, Mr. Davidson, because it's not an ordinary request, but can you do it urgently? That is, contact your lawyer today and possibly sign the papers no later than Wednesday. I tapped my fingers on the smooth, polished oak surface of my desk and idly thought that I needed a manicure. When I was young, I had the habit of biting my nails, or rather my fingers, until they bled. I never understood where it came from, but manicures are cheaper than psychiatrist visits, so I made it part of my routine, along with monthly $25 haircuts, and have stuck with it for the last 20 years. The last few months have pretty much disrupted my usual routine. Do I understand you correctly, Mr. Henry? My wife, who is leaving me and our home of almost 40 years, and also giving up her husband's last name, wants me to drop everything and rush through the paperwork to give her freedom in a seemingly unreasonably hasty manner. Did I understand you correctly? She seems to have forgotten that I am also a professional. I also have a job and obligations. Henry met my gaze for a moment, then lowered his eyes again and reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a piece of paper and looked at me. Sorry, Mr. Davidson, but yours, Miss Meadows, read me the following statement and asked me to read it to you if there were any. If you had any difficulty in complying with her request to expedite the process. I said nothing, and Henry, running his finger along the edge of the paper, as if in a learned gesture, said softly, Hugh, I know it's hard for you, and I'm not giving you time to process everything that happened. However, as you yourself said, if you once loved me, if even part of that love is still alive, give me freedom. Let me go. I thought I had already experienced everything. I thought she had done all the damage she could to me. How wrong I was. I sat there and wanted to drink so badly that I could barely stop myself from trembling. Henry stood up, carefully folded the paper, and put it back in his pocket. He didn't look at me. Approaching the door, he finally turned around. I met his gaze. I'm sorry, Mr. Davidson. There is nothing easy about divorce, and I understand how difficult it is for you. I can see from your face how hard this was for you. I have been involved in many divorce cases, and the only cases where it made sense to procrastinate and resist were those where both parties still had hope for reconciliation, where both wanted to save the marriage. In your case, you can show the documents to the lawyer, but your wife is not trying to deceive you. This is the fairest proposal I have ever seen, with the exception of one case last year, and it was a divorce that should not have happened. I still have bad feelings about that incident. But it's like ripping off a band-aid. It's personal, man to man. Don't delay. Finish everything quickly for the sake of both of you. Then he left, and I was left alone with the envelope. No one came in for an hour while I sat and just looked at him. Finally, I picked up the phone on the table and made the call I knew I had to make. Even with the expedited process, thanks to my agreement to try the case in Chicago, where her new boyfriend's connections made justice a very flexible concept, it took almost a month before I received the papers through UPS. During this month, I tried to sleep in our house, in our bedroom. I tried. Forced myself to come back again and again every night. It was just a house, a piece of brick, wood, and glass. There are no ghosts. I'm a rational person, and yet, when I turned off the light and lay down in our bed, which, as it seemed to me, had always been ours alone, I felt her presence. It seemed to me that if I suddenly turned on the light, I would see her next to me with that half-smile that made me nickname her Mona in the early years of our marriage, for her resemblance to the dark Mona Lisa. But what's worse, I also felt his presence in the room. I couldn't see him. I've never seen a photograph of him. I did my best not to see any of the material Gale's detectives had collected, and I believed Mary when she said she never brought him into our bedroom. But nevertheless, he was there. Just as he invaded our lives, he also invaded our home. After 2 weeks, I gave up. I found a one-bedroom apartment in Bay Meadows near Hunt's headquarters and moved in with the bare essentials. Every evening, I allowed myself 3 whiskeys on the rocks between 8 and 11 p.m., sometimes 2, but never more than 3. It seemed to me that every time after the third glass, I wanted to have another one to feel a little better, but I didn't want to end up on 8th Street again. No one mentioned her name, but Percy, Bobby, and several other more experienced bank employees did their best to invite me to dinner or to a Sharks Arena football game. Bobby was even going to take me deep-sea fishing for the weekend, but I was always uncomfortable on the water and didn't want to drink Antivert for 2 days to avoid dizziness and sit on a chair catching some damn giant fish that I didn't want to eat it and hang it on the wall either. He called me a wimp, but instead took me to some dirty nightclubs in Atlanta that weekend, where we got pretty drunk, and I refused the sexual favors of a lady he swore was pure. On the way back to Jacksonville on Sunday evening, I lounged in my chair drinking hot coffee from Starbucks. Nothing special, just hot black coffee the way I like it. "Does Chavon know you were doing this with the pros over the weekend?" I asked, watching him savor champagne that cost $1,000 a bottle. He glanced at me and his smile faded. "I don't report to her, but if I brought a woman and did this to her in front of her, Chavon wouldn't say a word." I just looked at him. "Are you serious, or is it just bravado?" He tried to frown, but then the usual smile appeared on his face again. Okay, I wouldn't do it in front of her. I need to sleep sometime, and I'm sure she would have hurt me. So no, I wouldn't do it in front of her, but I have done it before. Nowadays, I tell her what I'm doing if she asks. We have no secrets, but I know that she will not reproach me for anything. Just like if I turn to her at night and tell her to bring a tube of ointment. She will do whatever I say, any. We just sat in silence for a few minutes, and I knew what he was thinking, and he probably knew what I was thinking too. Was it hard? I mean, how did you get through it? How did you manage to take her back and make things right? He thought for a minute. I saw that he chose his words carefully, knowing who he was talking to. At some point, it seemed to me that I couldn't. I didn't say a word to her for 2 weeks. She called me dozens of times, begged me to forgive her, said that they just drank, that they got carried away. It didn't mean anything. The usual empty excuse. I called my parents and told them what happened. My dad told me to come to Nashville. When I arrived, my mother, father, Andre, Gaston, and Philippe were there. Andre was Bobby's younger brother, who Bobby found with Chavon when Gale canceled the Knights Bank meeting. The only thing that saved Andre's life was that Chavon threw herself between them when Bobby had already landed a couple of good blows on him. Gaston and Philippe are their older brothers, and in stature they were more like titans than humans. They took us out into the backyard, just like when we were kids, and we started beating each other until we were exhausted. Gaston and Philippe kept me from killing him and pulled me away when he could no longer raise his arms to defend himself. After that, it's hard to describe, but we left it behind. We are family. We are not in perfect harmony at family gatherings, but we can be in the same room. It was more difficult with Chavon. I couldn't beat her. It took another month. I went out and slept with half a dozen women, had fun, but realized something very unpleasant. Yes, I asked, although I already guessed what he was going to say. I love this little devil. This is a problem. What a difference, he smiled wryly. In the end, I let her come back. I forced her to achieve this, but, as I said, now she is ready to do anything for me. At first, I dated other women right in front of her so that she could feel what I experienced. But at some point, I realized that I was just chopping the branch I was sitting on. I didn't want to scare her away, but I wanted to punish her for hurting me. And you survived it. Yes, you can live with this. You can put up with anything if you want it bad enough. The hardest thing is that I will never know for sure if she is telling me the truth. She swears she doesn't know why she did it. She said they were just drinking. She always liked Andre, and it just happened. That's what she said, it just happened. He turned away and looked out the window. I will never know, and sometimes it torments me, but it happened that I did things that I could not explain, even if they put a gun to my head. Sometimes, you just don't know why, and we have to live on. He looked at me with a sad smile, as if he understood that this was not forgiveness for me. Because you love this woman. Yes. The next week, on Tuesday, Peter called. He had his own life, a business that took up 80 hours a week, a wife he loved, and a son he loved even more. We saw each other a couple of times a year and called each other every 2 months if Mary or I didn't call him first. Dad, what's going on between you and Mom? Hello, Peter. How are you and Marlena doing? How is the smartest 3-year-old in the world doing? I work too much, Marlena works too much, and Austin is getting smarter by the minute. Now, what's going on between you and your mom? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Dad, that's enough. I called my mom, and she said she lives in Chicago and that you and her have broken up. I tried to get her to admit that it was a joke, but she just acted weird and said it wasn't a joke. You live in different cities and are getting divorced. Maybe I'm going crazy. I thought there was a law prohibiting people who have been married for as many years as you from getting a divorce. You're not going crazy, Peter. Your mother filed for divorce, and I signed the papers to give her the divorce. She moved to Chicago, moved all her stuff out of our house, and asked me to sell it and split the proceeds in half. Damn it, what is it about Chicago? And didn't any of you think about talking to your kids before doing such a stupid thing in your old age? As for Chicago, you'd better ask your mother. It's none of my business. As for our breakup, I understand that you think it is necessary to look after us like children, but we are not that old yet. We don't need your permission to separate, and this has nothing to do with you or Nicole. It just happened. I have nothing more to add. Do you understand, Dad, that this is not fair, either on your part or on her part? You drop this bombshell, and then neither of you wants to explain what's going on. When I call Nicole, she'll be shocked. Sorry, Peter. I can only say that this is not my initiative. Your mother filed for divorce. If you want to know what's going on, ask her. 2 hours later, Nicole called. Dad, this is crazy. Peter called me. I told him it must be some kind of elaborate joke. Then I called my mom. It even sounds somehow different. She said you two were getting a divorce, breaking up after 36 years together. What are you doing? What your mother said. She filed for divorce. I signed the papers so that everything would go through and the divorce would be finalized soon. She wanted a fast-track divorce as quickly as possible, and it looks like she's going to get it. Dad. Then came the question I had been waiting for. Have you done something? Did you have an affair? That's the only explanation I can think of if this is all true. It's hard for me to believe, but this is the only way I can understand why my mother wants a divorce. Although even in this case, I would hardly believe it. I wasn't upset. Mom was a saint. For children, mothers are always saints. It's fathers who ruin marriages. I didn't have an affair. I won't say anything more, Nicole, than what I already told Peter. It's none of your business. I know it affects you, but it only affects your mother and me. This has absolutely nothing to do with you or Peter. I still love you both, and I know your mother loves you too. If you want to know anything else, talk to her. She wasn't happy, but finally said she would talk to Mary and then get back to me. I never expected to see Peter walking into my office on a Friday afternoon. He seemed to have been wearing the same clothes for 2 days, unshaven and carrying a bag over his shoulder. He looked nothing like the world-famous neurosurgeon. He's taller than me and has Mary's light brown skin color, not my black hair. And in appearance, he is more attractive than me. I think this is because of her. He entered before Lucy, my secretary, could announce him. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was quite a feat for him to free up a day on Christmas to meet with us, but here he appeared in the middle of the year on a working day. His hair was tousled, and his brown eyes, inherited from Mary, were cold. At first, I thought he was just furious with me. I figured she had lied to him, and he thought I was the one who initiated the breakup. I flew to Chicago, he said after just standing there and looking at me for what seemed like an eternity. I met the bastard she lives with, and she told me what she did. She cheated on you for almost a year, and then just left you to play house with a guy closer to my age than her. I still can't believe that bitch is my mother. He threw his bag on a chair, came up to me, and hugged me. I froze for a moment. We were never too tactile, a legacy of my Boston father. I remember he hugged me only once, but I knew that he loved me. I tried to be more open with the kids, but I was always a little reserved. Peter had inherited it from me, but now he was hugging me tightly. Sorry, Dad. I was like Nicole. I thought it must be you. I couldn't imagine I still can't. I feel sick when I think about her with him. I turned him around, sat him on the chair opposite my desk, and called Lucy. When she came in, I told her, 2 brandies from my stock. When she brought 2 glasses, I handed one to Peter. Take it. I know you don't drink, but this will help. He took a small sip, coughed, and choked. For a person who does not drink, brandy is an ordeal, especially in such quantities. When he regained his breath, he ran his finger along the rim of his glass and spoke without looking at me. She didn't tell me about him until we got to his house. She said she was staying with a friend. I walked in, thinking it was her friend, but she came out, and I immediately felt something was wrong. She took me into the living room. We sat down, and I asked her what the hell was going on. She said you two were just tired of each other, nothing dramatic. That one day you realized that you were living on autopilot and decided that you were too young to stop. He took another sip. I told her I would never believe it. That's when he emerged from the bedroom. This bastard was in his pajamas and sat next to Mom with his damn hand on her chest. He seemed to hint that he was sleeping with her. She lowered her eyes, and I thought that she did not have the courage to look me in the eyes. But she looked. She didn't remove his hand. She just looked at me and said that she fell in love and was going to get married again as soon as the divorce was finalized. She said that she didn't want to tell me because it would be difficult to understand and too sudden. She wanted to wait so we could get used to the news. He took a deep breath. I asked her what happened, and despite her lies, from her words with him, I was able to understand what happened. Eventually, she couldn't look me in the eyes. He fell silent. For a long time, he said nothing. She didn't want me to stay there, but she wanted me to stay at the hotel so we could talk, so I could get to know him. I stood there and told her that the last thing I wanted was to meet this bastard. He said that if I were a Jew, I would sit Shiva, because my mother, the woman I loved, died. I told her that she was dead to me, and to Marlena, and to Austin, that if I knew Nicole, then she probably lost her daughter and granddaughter. I told her I didn't want to know her new number and didn't want any contact at all. I looked into her eyes and told her that this was the last time I would talk to her. Then I walked out of that hell and never looked back. We just looked at each other. Sorry, Dad. I don't even know what to say. You can say goodbye. What? You just lost both your father and your mother. I think you'll be lonely. I don't understand. She's your mother and Austin's grandmother. She loved you as long as you lived on this earth. She loves this child. She never did anything to lose your love. She's a fucking cheater. Maybe, but she didn't cheat on you. Her problem is with me, not with you, Austin, Nicole, or Calabria. I'm on your side. I'm not asking for this. It's none of your business, Peter. She didn't kill me. She didn't go to jail. She left for another man. You shouldn't turn your back on your mother just because she's with someone else. I hope you can look at this more calmly over time. You don't have to call him dad or befriend him, but you have to treat her like a mother because she's your mother. Or don't call or come here anymore. You can't say that. I hope you can understand, Peter, because I love you, Austin and Marlena. I don't want to lose you, but your mother gave me life even if it was for less than a year, and I can't let you turn your back on her just because she doesn't want to be married to me anymore. My adult son, holding other people's lives in his hands, just looked at me, and I couldn't believe the tears rolling down his cheeks. He left Jacksonville that same day. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. I was at home, sipping the second of 3 scotches and watching a rerun of House when the phone rang. I looked at the ID and answered. I called her this afternoon, Dad. Glad to hear it, Peter. I guess it wasn't easy, but in the end, you'll be glad you did it. She started crying before we even finished talking. I told her what you said. He said that I couldn't forgive her for what she did yet, but I could. I'm not going to lose my mother or father. Although I didn't want it, I couldn't resist. What did she say when you told her? She just burst into tears even more, and then said, "Of course it's your father." I didn't say anything, but I couldn't help but think, it's a pity that she didn't remember this earlier. The package of divorce documents arrived a couple of weeks later. I waited a couple of months before putting the house on the market. I knew there was no point in holding on to him, but something inside me resisted the final break. However, the papers, literally drawn up in black and white, were the last news. We were completely strangers. The Davidson family no longer existed in Mandarin. I put the house on the market and intentionally set the price $20,000 less than the neighboring houses. I could have asked for more, but it seemed like a quick way to get rid of everything, as Matt Henry said. The house sold for this price in less than a month. I signed the papers, received payment, and transferred 30% to Henry's law firm. After receiving official confirmation of payment, I felt a cold emptiness from Chicago. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was still amazed. Like Charlie Brown and that ill-fated ball that Lucy always snatched from under his feet in the Peanuts comic strip. Mary continued to do this to me, and I was still surprised every time. Finally, I had to admit the obvious. She left. I tried to pull myself together. That Thursday, I walked into Gail's office, one of the few people allowed to do so, and found her discussing the profit and loss statements of the entire banking network with Coffee à la Porte. Both women looked up from their computer screens as I entered. "I didn't know you wanted to talk to me," Gail said. "What's the problem this time? I've had many job responsibilities over the years, but essentially I've been the person to whom problems have been handed over. Underperforming branches, entering new markets, or leaving unsuccessful ones, firing executives who have outgrown their level, preventing potential PR crises. I've been through it all over the years. I had the appropriate professional qualifications, but by and large, I was a crisis manager. When I needed expertise, I found it and brought it in. I need help with establishing new interpersonal relationships." Coffee looked at me with interest. Gail laughed and told her. "He wants help with how to start dating." Coffee looked at Gail first and then at me. "Did I miss something?" "You just don't speak our language," Gail said with a smile. "We've known each other for too long." She looked at me. "I'm glad you're starting to move on, Hugh. I've already started to worry about you. I held on until the last, but life moves on. Coffee looked at me with a slight smile. I'm amazed you even need help, Hugh. I haven't been here that long, but I've heard you rebuff many attempts by women to talk you into cheating on your wife. I think you should know who is single and available here. Thank you, Coffee. I had opportunities, I answered, but I never took advantage of them and was not a frequent guest in nightclubs. I would like some advice on where to go to. Take your luck, both women laughed. Rough, but accurate, I nodded. Don't worry, Gail, Coffee said. I'll take it upon myself. I know a couple of places where good luck awaits him. At 8 p.m., I walked into the Pelicans, a downtown bar I'd been to a couple of times with bank clients looking to check out Jacksonville's nightlife. I preferred the bars on the coast or a cozy place called O'Brien's on the west side of town, but the Pelicans had a certain reputation and was featured in national and regional publications as a hip spot for the young and hip sort of there, they didn't call it now. Coffee was standing nearby when we entered and led me to one of the tables for four that were scattered around the room away from the long bar that ran along the wall. She waved to her friends who saw us and nodded to me, pointing to the table. A minute later, we found ourselves at a table with four attractive young women and six guys buying them drinks. "Who is this with you, grandfather?" One of the young guys grinned. The tall, red-haired girl sitting next to him elbowed him in the side. "Don't be an asshole, Greg. Is that not enough for you in the office?" "There's nothing to be offended by," I answered, extending my hand to him. "I know I'm not the age of this crowd, but I'm still strong enough to do without a walker." He just grinned and shook my hand and then let it go. "My mistake, man, sorry. I'm just jealous. I hate anyone who comes here with coffee by definition." A blonde came up to us and, taking my arm, said, "Why do you always find the best coffee? You're such a greedy bitch. You're just jealous that you can't have them all, Brittany. Although you've already collected your collection, haven't you?" The blonde just stuck her tongue out at Coffee, then turned to me. "You're married, right? All the best ones are always married." Coffee intervened. "No, Hugh is free. Just been out of the loop for a while. I decided to give him a tour of Jacksonville nightlife." "What are you doing, Hugh?" Brittany asked, pressing her body against my arm. She was not wearing a bra, and her breasts were clearly visible through the thin fabric. "He's one of the top managers at my bank," Coffee answered for me. "Oh, what is your position, Hugh?" Brittany asked. "Are you checking that box off your list, Brittany?" Coffee grinned. "You won't forget about Rodney, will you?" "Who is Rodney?" "Anyway, you can call Hugh Solver. They give him the most difficult problems." "Sounds so exciting. Would you like to buy me a drink and tell me about it?" Coffee chuckled and looked at me, then at Brittany. "Okay, Brittany, I'll give it to you if you promise to be more gentle with him." "Do you have anything against it, Hugh?" I looked at the tall blonde in a silver dress that only hid part of what it seemed like it was supposed to hide. Her glossy lips and heavy breasts, which were barely supported by the fabric, seemed almost frightening in their gravity. "Well, it depends, Brittany. Do you happen to bite?" She smiled, revealing dazzling white teeth. "Only if I really like you." I looked back at Coffee. "I'll take a risk. Thank you, Coffee." "You'll thank me on Monday if you're still alive," she winked. I have to admit, it really was one of the most exciting nights I've had in the last few years. About an hour after Brittany and I left the Pelicans, we found ourselves at her condominium on the coast. I was standing at the window, watching the waves roll onto the shore of Atlantic Beach, when I saw in the reflection how she quietly approached me. She was already without clothes, her magnificent breasts swayed slightly with every step, and in her hands were two glasses filled with a dark drink. "I feel a little overdressed," I said without turning around. "It's easy to fix," she answered, putting the glasses on the table nearby and turning me to face her. She knelt down, unfastened my belt, and pulled down my pants along with my underwear. A moment later, she was already caressing me, leaving not a single centimeter of my body unattended. "That's nice," I said, not even knowing what else to say. This was the first time in a long time, and I was stunned. What can you even say in a situation like this when a beautiful young woman you barely know suddenly shows her feelings so actively? She just smiled, releasing me for a moment, then took a glass of brandy, took a small sip, rinsed her mouth with it, and pressed herself against me again. Mary could do something like this. In fact, she did once, but a long time ago. As someone witty said, every kiss is the same thing, and every time a new experience. This one was exactly like that, completely new, and this feeling was not given by technology, but by another face and other eyes looking up at me. I closed my eyes and barely had time to open them when I suddenly felt that she lowered me into an ice glass. Before I could scream, she wrapped her warm lips around me again. I barely had time to take a deep breath before I felt that everything was already ending, and my body began to shake from this storm of sensations. Brittany seemed pleased, not looking away from me for a second. She carefully sat down on the floor next to me, narrowing her eyes and running her finger over my face. "It was nice," she said. "It's better to finish quickly the first time. Then we have time to enjoy the second and third, and maybe even the fourth. My kitchen is full of food that can be cooked or reheated. We may not leave the bedroom until Monday." I wanted to tell her that, judging by past experience, the next time would probably happen only late in the evening of the next day, but her look was so determined that a strange feeling came over me. In fact, I wasn't afraid of being eaten alive. A little more frightening was the thought that she was used to strong, passionate 27-year-olds and not to her 57-year-old well-preserved, but still 57-year-old grandfather. I have never felt embarrassed because I have never had to perform in front of a stranger, at least not in this life. Still, I'll do whatever I can for God and country, something like that. I survived it and was able to leave her house and walk to a waiting limousine on Monday morning. She gave me one last kiss, but I thought she was just being nice. I got the impression that although she liked me and would probably give me a C out of 5, she wasn't particularly impressed with me. As I said, I'm 57 years old. I was in my office, leaning back in my chair with my eyes closed, trying to stay awake. She hadn't really given me much time to sleep when I heard Coffee say, "Are you sleeping the sleep of the innocent?" I opened my eyes and looked at her beautiful face. She smiled. "I don't know whether to thank you or sue if my man's place never works again." She just smiled and said, "Brittany said she was very pleasantly surprised. She's never slept with anyone your age. She said you convinced her to expand the age range of men she would be willing to sleep with." Why do I feel like a pioneer? She came to my table, sat down on its edge, and began to swing one leg in stockings, placing it on the other. "I know you like the sex, Hugh. How was your weekend?" I thought about it. She obviously knew her friend, if Brittany was her friend. To be honest, there were times when she played adult films on her DVD player, and not because we needed an incentive. It is impossible to have sex for 24 hours straight. When I wasn't inside her, we really got bored. We somehow didn't really communicate. I was indulgent. The pauses between the moments when I recharged, if I didn't give her pleasure or use her sex toys, were deadly boring. I forgot how easy it was to communicate with Mary, and if we didn't feel like talking, we could sit outside and watch the squirrels or birds in comfortable silence. Coffee looked a little embarrassed. "I'm a little embarrassed. Brittany is a really smart woman, but besides stocks, bonds, and sex, she has little interest. Do you want me to look for someone else? Maybe someone older, more experienced? Not an 80-year-old woman, please." She laughed and said, "You know, I know how to talk after sex." I looked at her and was tempted for a moment, just for a moment. "That's a fantastic compliment, Coffee. Honestly, I know that you are the kind of person I would enjoy spending time with both in and out of bed. But this is a very bad idea. I think we'd be good friends with benefits, but who knows, if one of us gets attached or gets hurt, we'll still have to work together and Gail won't want to lose either of us. So let's just stay platonic friends and you find me someone who likes to talk after sex." She just shook her head and stood up. "I know you don't believe it now, Hugh, but you'll be fine. Finding a good woman will not be difficult for you. The problem will be letting Mary go." The following weekend, I met a very attractive woman in her 40s. We had a drink, talked about the Iraq War, why the Jaguars were playing so badly, and discovered that despite the age difference, we had the same taste in movies, and we both unexpectedly loved contemporary country music. We didn't go to bed that night. This happened the following weekend, and everything went well. She was slender, tall 5 feet 8 inches, with excellent legs, although small breasts. But she was cute, and her small breasts were sensitive. I liked it. And the next weekend, I found myself back with Brittany, once again playing the role of the perfect man, biting into her ample breasts, rocking in mindless passion. I had a nice older lady with whom I would have been comfortable, but I slept with a young, very sexy, and demanding 20-year-old with whom it was impossible to have a minute of meaningful conversation. This time I acted wisely. On Saturday afternoon, my cell phone rang with news of an urgent matter, and I had to leave for the bank, leaving Brittany behind. I feigned regret, but in reality I was extremely relieved. She was great to spend the night with, or even the night and morning, but this way I didn't have to talk to her. I alternated between Brittany and my older lady, happy with my little deception, but in the end, everything has to be paid for. One Saturday, as I was about to leave again, once again citing work, Brittany stopped me as I was pulling on my pants. She stood naked in front of me, with her heavy breasts, reddened and covered with marks from my kisses and bites, hanging down like tears. "Do you really think I'm that stupid, Hugh?" "Sorry, what? Do you think I'm so stupid? Would you be surprised if I told you that I have a master's degree in economic theory from the University of Chicago, and that I am currently working on a doctorate at the University of Florida? For relaxation, I watch C-SPAN and do the New York Times crossword puzzle by pen. But you think I'm just a mindless doll. I don't. Go to hell, Hugh. Put on your clothes and get out." I understood, but I decided to play it out to the end because I really didn't want to offend her. "I don't know what you're talking about. Unscheduled calls can always happen in a bank. It's not a 9-to-5 job like everyone thinks. They pay well, but when they call, you have to be ready." "Oh, come on, you old liar." She hit me in the face, and it hit me hard. There was blood on my lip. "It's strange that your urgent matters never appear when you have sex with me. When you kiss my breasts and have sex with me like a man possessed, you don't get calls. Why is that, Hugh?" I wiped the blood from my lip. "It's funny, but I like her more now than when I was head over heels in her hot body, enjoying her magnificent figure. I guess I'm really transparent, right? Sorry, Brittany. All men are pigs. You deserve better than an old liar who only comes around to have great sex with you. But we just don't have enough in common. All that connects us is that I like your body and everything you do in bed, and you. And I really like everything you do in bed, Hugh. It's not just the mechanics, you're really trying to please me. You'd be surprised how rarely this happens when I date guys my age." I leaned over and kissed her. She let me do it. "Give them time, Brittany. Over time, some guys mature. Everything is ahead of you. Men will always chase you, not you." I looked at her amazing body and shook my head. "No, honey, I'm just too old for you." She shook her head, kissed me again, and said, "Go away, old man, and think about me when you're on top of some 50-year-old with whom you have more in common." But she smiled at the same time. "Coffee was right, you have a certain cruel streak," says the man who had sex with me and feigned urgent business to avoid communication between acts. What could I say? She was right, but she smiled when I left her apartment. So I went back to my mature lady, and we had a relaxing weekend, and the sex was quite enjoyable. Saturday came, around 11 in the evening. We had dinner at Benny's, one of the best steakhouses in town by most, and I agreed. We walked along the boardwalk, looking out over the water, walked to the plaque that marks the spot where 2 Jacksonville sheriff's officers died in the courthouse massacre, and talked about that terrible day when so many people died. Then we returned to my place. I gave her pleasure, and then we had sex. It wasn't bad, even if it wasn't like Brittany, but not so bad. We lay in bed together. The TV and lights were turned off, but the street lights and the full moon shining through the curtain cast reflections on her skin, giving her the appearance of a marble statue. I reached out and ran my fingers along her shoulder, along her arm. And then it hit me. I didn't even realize what happened until I burst into tears. For several minutes, I didn't know why I was crying. She held my head to her small chest as I sobbed because I knew who and what had caused my tears. Later that night, she turned on the light and started getting dressed. "Sorry," I told her. "I don't know where that came from," I lied. She sat down next to me and kissed me on the cheek. "It was fun, a lot of fun. You're a good person, but there are too many ghosts here for me to be comfortable. Don't call me again, Hugh. I hope. I hope that someday you can start living again." She turned off the light as she left. When she left, I was left lying in the moonlight. It's been almost 6 months since Mary walked out of my life, and neither hot young women nor kind older women have been able to knock her out of my head and heart. I tried to move on like she did, but the pain was as strong as the moment she told me the truth when something in me died. Why the hell couldn't I do the same? Around Christmas 2007, I was spending time with Peter and Nicole. Los Angeles and New York are huge metropolises, but aside from their size, I don't think there are two more different places on Earth. It was always something exciting, or at least it was visiting both cities during December. New York has snow, freezing wind, gloomy taxi drivers and plays. Los Angeles, a few days later, 70-degree Fahrenheit weather, prostitutes in short shorts on the side streets, and the latest movie releases. We used to walk along Venice Beach, enjoying the waterfront view, the muscle guys, and the roller skates. I thought about this as I sat in Nicole and Simon's living room on the 23rd floor of their condominium with little Calabria in my arms. Despite her exotic name, Calabria was the most beautiful girl in the world. Well, or the most beautiful one ever born. Of course I was biased. Austin was the most beautiful boy, and now he is the smartest and most beautiful baby in the world. Although, at that moment, Calabria was also already a baby. She squirmed until I put her on the floor and staggered towards her father, who was waiting for her with open arms. He picked her up, put his hand under her small body, and with a forced grimace turned to Nicole. "I think it's time to change it. You want to show how strong the bond between mother and daughter is, right?" Nicole just laughed. "Nothing of the kind, dear. I would never interfere in a father-daughter relationship. You go and study." He made another grimace, but kissed his daughter and took her to the bedroom. My brown-eyed daughter, who resembled her mother to the point of pain in her heart, leaned towards me and covered my hand with hers. "You've lost weight, Dad, and you look tired. How are you? I know that we talk on the phone, but you can't understand anything over the phone. You could be terminally ill and still tell me funny stories about the bank, but you would never tell me how you really are doing." "I'm fine, Nicole. You know how little that tells me? How are you really? Why does it seem to me that you never recovered from?" "Mom." I released my hand and raised both in a gesture of surrender. "There's nothing to recover from here, my dear. She's gone, that's reality. The fact that I recover or don't recover will not change anything. Whether I'm there or not, she's still not around. She will always be absent, but life must go on. I want to see how little Calabria will drive you and Simon crazy when she brings home some notorious slacker, covered in tattoos and piercings." She smiled sadly. "I know what it will be, Dad. You know, I shouldn't have told you this." "What?" I promised my mother. I couldn't help myself. "Is she okay? Is she not sick?" "Physically, no." "What do you mean?" I promised her. I just looked at her. I've worked with people long enough to know how to have a conversation when someone doesn't want to share something important, is afraid of the news, or is trying to hide their mistake. "Nicole, you started the conversation. You want to tell. Whatever it is, you think it will be better for Mom if I find out about this. What is more important to you, the promise or her well-being? You know that I would never hurt her. Even now, I would never harm her." She sobbed, and I saw the first tear on her cheek. "She told me about this a few months ago. Maybe I should have told you, but she made me promise. It was so important to her that you didn't know. I just looked at her. Nicole, you can tell me, I'm an adult, and the truth. The truth is always better. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. No matter how hard it is, the truth is better than a lie. Finally, she looked into my eyes. She left him. It's only been 2 months since she left you and moved to Chicago for him. Less than a month after the divorce papers were signed. From him? From Kelly? Richard Kelly? Did she leave him? She licked her lips, wet with tears. She said they just realized it was over. He returned to his wife, and it started to dawn on me. And she didn't come back to me. She didn't even think about it, did she? Nicole didn't look at me. You can tell, honey, I'm a big boy, and the truth is always better. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about. It is better to know the truth, no matter how bitter it may be. Finally, she met my gaze. She said, she said that she doesn't want to see you anymore, that she wants to start a new life away from you. She said you might never know, and she didn't want to. Didn't want to. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. I sat down next to her and hugged her. She said she didn't want you to find out because otherwise you'd try to get her back. She said you never stopped loving her and she doesn't want to hurt you again. She just doesn't want to see you. Everything turned out to be as simple as shelling pears. For Mary, I remained a part of the past that she never wanted to see again. Forgive me, Dad, but I knew she was telling the truth. I saw it in her eyes. You still love her. If you knew it was over with him, you would. You would go after her again, and she would only hurt you. It would hurt both of you. I did this for you and for her. Did Peter know? Yes, he and I talked about it. It was better for everyone that you didn't know. I hugged her. Can you forgive me? I didn't know what to do. I did what I thought was right. I hugged her again. I know, honey, and you have nothing to feel guilty about. If you told me, it wouldn't change anything. As you said yourself, she wouldn't come back. I think I always knew this, but there is nothing better than facing the truth. Thank you for telling me. If I had any dreams, they are gone. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. I knew that the agreement between the children was that Mary would be with Peter before Christmas while I was with Nicole, and then with Nicole after Christmas when I went to Peter. I arrived in Los Angeles on December 27th. Peter was able to take 3 days off, and we had dinner at a fancy restaurant and exchanged gifts under the still green Christmas tree in their living room. We sat down to talk when Austin had already gone to bed. Then Marlena, the pretty red-haired nurse Peter had met while working at the hospital and who had made him a family man, took Austin into the bedroom, and Peter and I were left alone, looking out the large window at the evening view of Los Angeles. Their house was on the hills, but not too high to worry about possible landslides. Nicole said she told you about Mom and about him. Yes, and that I knew about this and helped hide it from you. Yes, but don't blame yourself. As I told her, knowing wouldn't change anything. You fulfilled your mother's wish, and it did me no harm. There is nothing for you to feel guilty about. He took a sip of non-alcoholic beer from a chilled Coors mug and didn't look at me as he said, I don't feel guilty, Dad. I don't think that would help you. I feel sad for both of you. I just looked at him. For both of us? Yes. Then he looked at me. You can lie to Nicole, but I know better. You still love her. Maybe you've been having fun with women in Jacksonville, but haven't been able to move on. I know you, and this hurts. You're a one-woman man, and I don't think you can ever truly let her go. I just shrugged. You may be right, but I'm sure your mother is probably still worried about what happened between her and him. After all, she sacrificed a lot for him, but she is still a beautiful woman. She may already be in a new relationship, or will be soon. She won't be left alone. You're wrong, and that's what pisses me the hell off. I looked at him, trying to understand what caused such a surge of emotions. We saw her a couple of times while she was with him. One time she came here, and another time Marlena flew with Austin to Chicago. We both thought the same thing. I silently waited for him to continue. She was unhappy, Dad. I don't think she was ever happy with him. Marlena had the same impression. She asked her directly if she loved him. She tried to understand why Mom left you for him, and Mom just shook her head. And then I talked to her on Skype a couple of days after the divorce took effect. He took another sip and looked into my eyes. I know you won't believe me, it doesn't make sense, but she was unhappy. She sounded like she was about to burst into tears after every second word, and that made me realize what had happened. This was news. What? What happened? Nicole didn't tell you? When I shook my head, he said, a week after she told us she and Richard had broken up, she called from San Francisco. She was transferred again. She's been there for over 4 months now. I took a long sip of Napoleonic brandy from my glass and couldn't help myself, saying, well, at least that makes sense. She moves to Chicago to be away from me, and then moves even further west to California. I think the only thing that could be further away is Hawaii. I think she was trying to get away from both of you, and this is understandable. I glanced at him curiously. I think that when she remembers you, she realizes what she lost, and when she thinks about him, she realizes what a waste of time it was, a mistake. After a moment of silence, what else was there to talk about after that? He turned to look out the thick glass window. Our reflections quivered in the moonlight outside. I know, Dad, what you must have been thinking. Thought. Why did I take it so hard when I found out that my mother was with that guy? I'm not a teenager, but an adult. I understand that you are adults, that parents sometimes disagree, but I acted as if I was 15 again. Yes, looking back, I was a little surprised. You were always so calm, rational, just like me. He turned and looked at the door leading to the second floor where their bedrooms were. At that moment, I didn't even realize what I was feeling. I knew I had exploded, but it wasn't until weeks later that I finally realized why. I was afraid. Afraid? You and Mom are our support for me and Nicole. Many of my friends' parents divorced, some once and some 2 or 3 times, and with this comes a lot of problems. Your parents are fighting and want you to take their side. Fathers try to bribe you with gifts and fit all their love into a week, and mothers spend every minute telling you what a scumbag their ex-husband is. And you and Mom were always next to us. When I met Marlena and our relationship became serious, I began to wonder if she looked like my mother, and she does. You probably don't see it, but she looks similar. She's kind and funny, she's damn beautiful, and I never once worried about her, even when she was working with guys who would sleep with nurses and female volunteers any chance they got. She's honest, that's the key word. There were times when she admitted that she was attracted to someone. I slept with her so that she forgot about everything, but I always knew that she would not go behind my back. I knew that if she ever decided to leave, she would tell me so with respect. He took a sip of non-alcoholic beer, which to me was just flavored water, but he never craved alcohol, and that was good for a man of his profession. Then Richard Kelly showed up. I tried very hard to get my mother to explain to me how it happened, but she just couldn't. I come to work and try to focus on the patients, operating, without thinking about Marlena and the men she might meet. Now she's a housewife, but she goes shopping, and I used to use stores as a place to hunt for new girlfriends. She takes Austin to pediatricians and specialists, and there are men there too. She still has a medical license, and from time to time she needs to take short courses or attend seminars to renew it, and there are men there too. He looked at my reflection in the glass. You know, I trust her, Dad, I really do. But before I would have bet my life on it, I would have put my head under the guillotine on a bet that Mom would never look at another man. I play these psychological games in my head. I imagine one day Marlena will walk into the living room after she puts Austin to bed, or maybe he'll grow up and go on a date, and she'll say to me, Peter, I've met someone else and I'm leaving you. I think I play out these scenarios in my head to see if I can continue to breathe, to continue to work like you after my life is over. He fell silent again for a minute. Mom stole my confidence. She took away the belief that happily ever after could be a reality. There are days when I hate her so much. Now I can't truly believe that Marlena and I will always be together, and it's killing me. I gave him time. You understand that you have to overcome this, right? You're too smart not to understand this. If you constantly doubt, continue to imagine her cheating in your mind, see the day when she will come in and tell you that she is leaving you, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will create it yourself. I don't know how. I walked up behind him and put my hand on his shoulder. You're a rational person, just like me, Peter. You know that there are millions of couples in this country, and there are hundreds of millions of them around the world. Millions of them will be separated, hearts broken, lives destroyed. It happens, but remember and realize that millions of couples will go through this and will never give in to temptation, never be tested. There are other millions who will face difficulties, perhaps stumble, but they will rise and continue to build their marriages. Life is a numbers game, and you just have to believe that you will be one of the lucky ones. Let's say you find yourself among the losers. Let's say in a year or 36 years, Marlena will walk into the room and say that she is leaving you. Even if she breaks your heart, would you regret marrying her? Would you regret having Austin? Would you regret even a minute spent with her? He was silent for a long time. No, I don't think I would regret it. Have you ever regretted marrying your mother? Not for a minute. Look, Peter, we can never know the future. If I had known 36 years ago what awaited me and had the opportunity to see what life would be like in those 36 years, I would not have done anything differently, except perhaps try to prevent the trip on which she met Richard Kelly. I knew it was a mistake, but I couldn't help myself. I sent her an email to her old email address, assuming she had saved it for work. I wrote, Mary, Nicole, and Peter told me the whole truth. I don't blame them. It was a difficult secret, and they kept it for 4 whole months. I don't know if my opinion or concern matters to you, but I'm sorry it didn't work out for you and Richard. I know you, and I know that even if you couldn't tell me, he meant something to you. You are not the kind of woman who will sacrifice everything for a passing hobby. Peter told me you're unhappy. He's a pretty smart guy. He probably takes after me. If he is right, I just want to say that you can always write to me for any reason. We could always talk about everything. We are not together, and I accepted that. We would have separate lives from now on, but we were friends in addition to being lovers and husband and wife. Despite everything that has happened, I still consider myself your friend. No conditions or obligations. Write if you want to talk. Hugh. I never received an answer. To be honest, I wasn't expecting it. I just felt like I had to do it. Life went on. I signed up for the dating site Plenty of Fish because the idea of starting a relationship with someone in the banking industry that I would see every day seemed less and less good. A virtual platform for singles seemed to be a more suitable option. Here you could get to know each other and communicate without worrying about disappointments or conflicts with colleagues. It seems like a suitable way of life. I met several nice, interesting women there. Some were desperate for a husband. Others simply wanted a night of passion after being told by their husbands or partners that they were bad in bed. I avoided those who were looking for a husband, but I convinced some women who were no longer as slender as in their youth that in the right hands they could still ignite passion. Some of us never made it to bed, but we became friends. These women were people you could talk to, exchange jokes online, go see a show at the Times Union Arts Center in downtown Jacksonville, and then maybe have a couple of cocktails with no expectations for the evening. Business continued as usual, but alarm bells began to ring on the national stage, and the mortgage and construction sectors began to tremble under the first tremors of the impending crisis. Something bad was coming. Gale, Coffee, and more experienced heads than mine gathered and began to prepare for the approaching storm. Trouble was looming, even if most bankers and businessmen chose to ignore the problem. But Gale was as stubborn as her grandfather. She learned from him and was willing to do whatever was necessary to preserve the Hunt brand for the next generation. I was a kind of punisher, a person for dirty work. Closed banks that were on the ropes, called in bad loans, launched bankruptcy proceedings and sell-offs for companies that either were a bad idea to begin with or had become a bad idea. I spent a lot of time closing weak banks, firing people and buying new banks, strengthening positions and firing people again. I fired a lot of people that year. He informed middle-aged men that their positions had become unnecessary and that they would have to go out into the aggressive outside world and start a new life. Some of them didn't even survive a day after I told them they were fired. One man dropped dead from a heart attack as he left his office. Two committed suicide, hoping that it would not deprive their family of a large insurance policy. One of them managed to pull it off so that the insurance paid out, the other did not. It was far from a warm and joyful time, neither in my personal life nor in business. However, business, even banking, is not as dry and calculating as it might seem from the outside. It's not all ledgers and green armbands, it's a fight for survival, just in suits and ties. This is still a cruel nature, red with blood and teeth. Another Christmas has arrived, 2008. New president, new world in many ways. One day Peter asked me, "Dad, do you have someone special in your life?" "No, I just have a good social life. There are women who are my friends. They make me laugh." "Any sex?" "Quite enough." "Details?" "Pervert." "It's true," Marlena said with a smile, coming up behind him and pressing herself against Peter's chest. Then she smiled slyly and added, "Thank God." I just looked at my son, and he looked at me while he kissed the top of his wife's head, and I felt relieved for both of them. It seemed to me that he had experienced the pain of his mother's betrayal, and I was glad that at least he was able to put it behind him. Nicole asked me the same question, only more delicately. "Are you happy, Dad? Is there someone special?" Yes and no. I have friends, I go on dates, I'm not alone. I have a job, colleagues at the bank, and the work takes about 60 hours a week. Not a bad time. Honestly? Honestly, it's not as good as the life I had with your mother, but it's probably the best thing I can have without her. Listen, I'm almost 60. I'm not going to get married again. I'm not going to raise children. The real part of my life, you guys, is behind me. I'm ready to be a loving grandfather. Don't worry about me, Nicole. I'm fine. She didn't say anything, but I felt that she wanted me to ask her about her mother. How is your mom? Doesn't matter. With your health? Partly. She has lost weight. Looks older. She always looked younger than her age. And now he's starting to look his age. She's had a rough couple of years, darling. More difficult than yours? Maybe. Remember, I was the innocent party. Breaking someone's heart, cheating on them, living a double life is not easy. Then we broke up. Then she broke up with her new man, and has she had anyone in this last year? She went on dates, I know that, but none of them were serious. Part of me was pleased to hear this. I wanted her to be hurt, but then I imagined myself in her place. If it was me 10 years ago, if I was the one who cheated on her for a year, and then had to face her and admit what I did, it would probably kill me. It's easy to be the innocent party. But if all the blame, and shame were on me, especially if I still had feelings for her, it would destroy me. If she is still human, then she must feel guilty for what she did to the man who loved her. I don't know how I can help, honey. I sent her a letter a while ago, letting her know that I still considered us friends and that she could always talk to me. But she never answered. Is this true, Dad? Do you still consider her a friend after everything that happened? Yes, we have always been friends, in addition to being lovers. There was no one with whom it was as easy for me to talk about everything as with her. I appreciated her advice, her intelligence. She could always make me laugh, no matter how bad the day was. If we weren't married, weren't lovers, I think we would still be good friends. There was something between us. I don't know how best to describe it. Could you be her friend again, Dad? She doesn't want my friendship, dear, or my love either. This is completely obvious. She needs a friend, Dad, and she needs you. She will never tell you this or let you know, but she is dying, dying inside. She is no longer the woman we all knew. You could try to contact her, for Peter's and my sake. I know it won't be easy for you, but you can do it. Remember when I was little? You said that there would never be anything that I couldn't ask of you and that you wouldn't do. Back then, I really believed that if I asked you to get the moon and bring it to me, you would somehow be able to do it. And I would do it, but this. I looked into her eyes and saw her mother's eyes in them and realized that I could not refuse her anything, even if I knew that it was impossible. I'll try to talk to her, honey. I'll do my best. The next week I sent her a letter, but it turned out that she had changed her address. The letter was returned with a note, "Such an address does not exist on the server." I found the number for McDaniel's San Francisco office and called, asking to speak to Miss Mary Meadows. Can I find out who is asking her? Hugh Davidson. Please stay on the line. After a long wait, the pleasant voice came back on the phone. Sorry, Mr. Davidson, but Miss Meadows is not in the office right now. Can I leave her a voicemail then? There was another long pause. Sorry, sir, but her voicemail is completely full. Then can I leave a message with you? Sorry, but I have 4 more calls on the line. Could you call me later? She was out 10 minutes after the office opened, 10 minutes before lunch, 30 minutes after lunch, and half an hour before closing. This happened on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Her voicemail was always either full or broken. Naturally, they could not give her email address, since this was against company rules. I tried calling for 2 weeks until finally a tired, once friendly voice said, I'm sorry for any inconvenience, sir, but this is a business office. I don't want to be rude, so I'm sorry, but your calls have become a bit of a problem. We have clients who call for business matters, and we simply cannot afford to have employees inundated with personal calls. Why do you think this is personal? I didn't even say why I was calling. This could be the case. After another long pause, excuse me, sir, but you are putting me in a very awkward position. Please. I knew it was true. She is just a secretary receptionist who follows the instructions of her boss, who told her not to let me get anywhere. Mary wouldn't give an inch, wouldn't even let me explain why I called. I remembered what she told Matt Henry. No contact, no messages. She didn't even want to breathe the same air as me. It was unpleasant for her to be in the same city. I could fly to San Francisco and walk into McDaniel's headquarters, but I knew I wouldn't get past the phalanx of secretaries, employees, and security guards she would line up to stop me. The more I thought about it, the more anger grew inside me. It took a day to reach the critical point. Not only had she destroyed my world, broken my heart, and left me alone among shadows and ghosts while she had sex with first Richard Kelly and then with unknown lovers, but she could not even show basic politeness and acknowledge my existence. It seemed that I had already died for her. The next day, in a fit of rage and despair, I released my demons. I sent a message to the general mailing address for McDaniel's San Francisco office. At that moment, I didn't care how many secretaries, minor employees, or colleagues saw him. Mrs. Meadows Mary, or maybe I should call you bitch. This is your ex-husband, the man who loved and adored you for 36 years, until you turned into a woman of easy virtue and made yourself a young lover. In case you forgot, I am a person who has never cheated on you. Sorry to try to call and talk to you. Obviously, the thought of hearing my voice is so disgusting to you that you intimidated your secretary into lying to me repeatedly. You didn't deign to pick up the phone yourself and say that you don't want to talk to me. Why am I surprised? Your dishonesty should not have come as a surprise to me. I've been telling myself that you're a decent woman for 36 years, but that was always a lie, wasn't it? A lie because you have always been a cheating woman. I just didn't want to see it. I was blinded by a love that I'm sure you never understood, because I'm sure you've never felt a single moment of love for me in all our years together. I remember how you belonged to another man when you first took me, gave me pleasure, and let me have sex with you for the first time. You cheated on the person you were planning to marry. Because you cheated with me, I convinced myself that it was just an irresistible passion that brought you to my bed. But our marriage began with an act of betrayal on your part. I am sure, or rather, almost sure, that you consciously decided that on my side life would be more profitable and prosperous than with your ex-fiancé. You knew I had money and bet that by following me you would live a comfortable life, which is what happened for over 30 years. There was not a single thing that you wanted that I would not willingly give to you. I gave you 2 children whom you loved, unless you lied about that too. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if Richard Kelly was the first man you seduced while pretending to be a loving wife. I was such an idiot. I knew you had been gone for so long. I knew you were a sexual dynamo, and I truly believed that all those long nights away from me you were chaste. Now I really believe, and it's not just anger and gloating, that you cheated on me for many years. I think your story about resisting Richard for months is complete nonsense. I think already on the first night you pleased him and gave him what you promised only to me. I think you are a liar and a deceiver. I think you are a selfish, heartless bitch in the fullest sense of the word. Looking back, even if I had to lose Peter and Nicole, I wish you would have decided then that your Harvard fiancé was a safer bet than I was. It's a shame you never decided to pretend to fall in love with me. I would like to have the opportunity to meet a loving, kind, and honest woman to make her my wife. I wish I hadn't spent most of my life adoring a woman who only existed in my imagination. Now it's too late. I'm almost 60. There will be no chance to live my life again and find a better wife, or perhaps just an honest prostitute who I could sleep with, knowing all the terms of the deal from the very beginning. When I left you on the day you were finally honest with me, I thanked you for the years you gave me and wished you all the best. You should have realized that I was lying. I'm only glad that your lover eventually got tired of you, threw you away like an obsolete object, and returned to his wife. I heard your side of the story, but I'm sure mine is closer to the truth. You are a fading, aging, stupid beauty. You're getting old, your looks are fading, and you really believed that a 45-year-old man wanted to start a new life with you. You believed his bullshit and left your faithful husband for a few months of good sex. You're still an attractive woman in a certain light, so I think you can continue to sell yourself even though your clients will get older and more desperate as time goes on. I just hope that your mad search for new sex will lead to you contracting one of those diseases that are disfiguring and painful and maybe even fatal. When you die, know that I will come to your grave. I will not come to your bedside to forgive you while you are alive. I will come to your grave to urinate on the ground, under which the body of the worst woman I have ever known will rot. You will never know the depth of hatred that I feel for you, and this is my main and only daily burning regret. Hugh. I wrote all this in the white fire of anger and sent it without thinking. A flurry of emotions raged inside me, but the main one among them was liberation and relief. Before that, I was noble and loving, forgiving the woman who tore my heart into pieces, but my real feelings were contained in the words that I poured out in a few minutes. I hoped that she was still able to feel pain from my words because I wanted to hurt her. For a moment, I thought about ruining Richard Kelly's life. I could do this regardless of his political connections and the power of his family. For all these years, I was the one who destroyed lives, careers, and entire communities using my natural savvy and the power of hundreds of millions of dollars that the Hunt family controlled. I could kill him, I could destroy his marriage if he really returned to his wife. I could have left him bankrupt on the street or in a prison cell with the cruelest people I could find. I played with this idea for several hours. Gail would support me, and it could be done without leaving a trace. But then, reluctantly, I gave up this fantasy. I was the wrong person. I didn't want to become someone who would do something like that for revenge. Everything I did before, I did dispassionately. The lives of those whom I destroyed or injured, I destroyed only out of duty. There was a line I wasn't about to cross, not now and hopefully never. Then I had time to regret the words I sent to Mary. I felt better than I had the entire year. These were the words that burned within me from the moment she told me about Richard Kelly. It was similar to how you feel when you feel really sick, and then you finally vomit and relief comes. No, I felt bad because I imagined what Peter and Nicole would think if they saw this letter. It would have hurt them just like their mother, but it was too late. The message had been sent. I doubted that this was what Nicole wanted when she hoped that I would help her mother. But sometimes even the greatest miracle workers fail, and I tried to reconnect with Mary. The blame lay with her. I never received a response to this letter. Peter and Nicole didn't let on that they knew about it, and they weren't exactly good actors to hide it, so she never told them, even though I imagined she must have known about the letter. It was as if I threw a pebble into a well and it disappeared, leaving neither a sound nor a ripple, as if it had never existed. It became obvious once again. For Mary, I simply ceased to exist. Life went on as usual. The country was hit by housing, banking, and economic crises. Most banks across the country were shaken and convulsed, with directors resigning or being visited by federal agents wondering if they had anything to do with the crisis. The feds came to see us, but not because we had problems. We were one of the few large banks in the country that stood like a rock. Our books were clean, our credit was strong, and our clients were protected. Gail Hunt and her board of directors were unwilling and unable to accept any federal bailout, loans, guarantees, or any hint of federal control through conditions that inevitably came with federal money coming in to support other banks. This created a lot of interest in certain circles, and anonymous but very influential individuals came to us, wanting in very simple terms to get a piece of our very successful financial pie. I attended one meeting with Gail, Percy, Bobby, two other directors, a representative of an important federal agency, and two high-ranking FBI officials. The meeting started calmly, but quickly escalated into veiled threats from the feds. Hunt Bank was a financial giant, but it was not the sovereign government of the United States. Everyone would be better off if the bank operated in harmony with the policies and goals of the federal government. In the interest of harmony, the bank had to accept federal funding and federal supervision of its activities. Gail made it clear that this would not happen. The federal officer looked at her like she was crazy and said she was a beautiful woman, and beautiful women did not fare well in federal prisons because of the attention from both guards and prisoners, both men and women. I wouldn't want something like this to happen to you, such a bright personality, the official said, but disagreements between private companies and the government inevitably lead to a moment of choice. Will you do what we ask, or will you break the law and lose your freedom and the future of your bank, to which your grandfather dedicated his life? She looked at him for a minute, then stood up. The official looked at her with curiosity. I have a personal office in the next room, she said calmly. Please come with me. I'd like to show you something, and we can discuss it in more detail. They went out together and returned 10 minutes later. The official did not say a word, only motioned for the FBI agents to leave, and they silently left the premises. We never heard from them again. We continued to receive visits, but these were lower-level employees and extremely polite. I never found out what Gail said or showed to that federal official, but back in the 80s, when first the mafia and then the South American criminal groups were trying to infiltrate the banking business, Old Man Hunt would just make a couple of calls and they would disappear. I knew he was a smart man. He loved to learn secrets and save them for the future. I never wondered what secrets he kept. I thought it was more useful to pretend that I knew nothing about it. By the summer of 2009, I received a call from Nicole. She said that her best friend and our almost adopted daughter, Brandy Summers, was getting married in New York. Brandy was a slender redhead who became Nicole's best friend before her parents went through a difficult divorce in the summer of 1994. In the midst of a divorce, her mother was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive form of breast cancer, and her father moved to Brazil after falling in love with a 24-year-old student he met while teaching a course at the University of North Florida. Brandy had no immediate family, and with her mother's approval, her father's connivance, and the permission of her distant maternal grandparents, the 15-year-old girl moved in with us and lived with us for 3 years until she went off to college with Nicole. She was almost a daughter to us, although she was not our own. She met a great guy from Boston. He is a college professor who teaches English. In fact, he lived and taught in Jacksonville for a time. He is divorced, and she met him when he came to work at the private school where she has taught for the past 5 years. She resisted for a long time. After all the scoundrels she's been involved with over the years, she's become very wary, but now she's head over heels in love. In general, she wants to get married in June. The celebration will be held at the house of the dean of the school where she works, and she wants you to be there to walk her down the aisle, just like her father. I froze for a moment, then asked, I'm honored, but what about her father? She hasn't heard a word from him for 5 years. The last time he wrote to her was that his new wife had given birth to twins and that, between these children and work in Sao Paulo, he simply would not have time to keep in touch with her. It was as if the bastard had kept in touch with her since he left the country. No, you are the only one for her who is close to the concept of a father. She wants it to be you. Certainly. I'll be happy to walk her down the aisle. Tell me the time and I will be there with bells and a very nice wedding present. 3 days later, Nicole called me again, and I knew she had bad news as soon as she said a few words. Dad, it's hard for me to say this, but... What? Brandy wanted you both at the wedding. You know how close she was to her mother. I knew. As much as Brandy loved me as a foster father, Mary was her true mother in all but blood. As she grew into a young woman, she needed female support, and Mary was there. I think I know what you want to say. Speak. Brandy didn't. I didn't. I couldn't believe that Mom couldn't. She couldn't forget the past. But she won't come if I'm there. I'm so sorry, Dad. I thought about it for just a minute. It was Brandy's day, the most important day of her life, and she needed Mary more than she needed me. Tell Brandy that I will be with her in thought and will visit her and her new husband later this year. Let them take good photos for me, okay? Okay, Dad, and I heard her tears. The wedding took place on a warm Sunday afternoon in July. The dean's house was a large, old and cozy New York farmhouse-style home transformed into a 21st century mansion. It was located in the center of an old apple orchard. Guests parked around the area, and the backyard was turned into an outdoor chapel. I arrived by taxi and entered quietly when I knew that most were already getting ready for the ceremony. I stood by the window and watched as Brandy and her slightly shorter professor fiancé exchanged vows under an apple tree whose branches were laden with red fruit. After the ceremony, the line for congratulations began, and I stood at the end, holding a gift wrapped in green and blue. Family and close friends stood by the happy couple. Brandy looked up and realized who I was. Hugh, she almost shouted, and then ran towards me. As she ran towards me, I looked over her shoulder and saw a tall, dark-haired woman dressed in a light summer dress with embroidered flowers. Hearing Brandy's voice, her gaze moved from the woman shaking her hand to me. Perhaps Nicole and Peter were right, and the last almost 2 years had been difficult for her. Perhaps she really had aged, lost that shine that made her look 10 years younger than her age. But if this was the case, I didn't notice it. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. I couldn't take my eyes off her, and she couldn't take her eyes off me either. Brandy then hugged me, and I lowered my head to kiss her forehead. We exchanged a few words, and when I looked again in the direction where Mary was standing, she was no longer there. I met the young professor, Brandy's fiancé, talked to Nicole and her husband Simon, ate a piece of wedding cake, and finally began to say goodbye. I cited urgent business in Jacksonville, said I was only there for one day to congratulate them, and promised to visit them later. When Brandy and Nicole refused to believe these excuses, I looked around, saw unfamiliar faces, and said, there are still a lot of wedding celebrations ahead. Mary won't come out again if I stay around. I don't want to spoil your holiday. I was here, I kissed you, I met your boyfriend, and now it's time for me to leave. Before leaving, I remembered the gift I had brought and handed it to Brandy, asking her to add it to the other gifts they would open later. She shook her head and said, no, Hugh, this is a gift from you. I want to open it now. Like a child unwrapping a Christmas present, she tore off the wrapping with ease. Nicole, Simon and Brandy's husband looked at her with a smile. Brandy then picked up the framed photograph and held it up to the daylight when she suddenly began to cry. Nicole looked at the photo and also began to cry, hugging Brandy. Simon and Brandy's husband just looked at the photo and then realized exactly what they were seeing. The photograph was of Mary and me, a loving couple, our almost adult daughters and Peter standing between us. It was a Christmas photo from a time long gone. I hugged Brandy one last time and said, "To the good memories we had," and walked away. On the way back to Jacksonville, I closed my eyes, and that brown-eyed, dark-haired woman in a light embroidered dress appeared before me again, like the afterglow of an exploding star imprinted on my retina. I couldn't erase this image from my memory, and I didn't want to. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.